Peace be with you. Welcome to another edition of Let the Quran Speak. My name is Safiyyah. I'm your host. In the past few years, there's been some discussion about the extent to which a Muslim woman may cover herself in public. The latest debate is about the face veil in public courts. We'll be looking at that later today. We'll also be taking a look at the fifth pillar of Islam, which is Hajj. And we begin as we usually do with a verse from the Quran. This week our verse is from Surah 17. And with me today, Brother Shabir Ali from the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
It's my pleasure as usual.
Now, the verse we're dealing with, maybe you can begin by discussing the verse in a little bit of detail. So we can
Surah 7, verse number 34, says basically in Arabic, لا تقف ما ليس لك به علم. Do not follow that of which you have no knowledge. إن السمع والبصر والفؤاد. Certainly the hearing, the vision, and also the mind is going to be questioned about, meaning that we will be held responsible for how we use these faculties given to us by God.
Mm-hmm. Now, on first reading of this verse, it seems like it's suggesting that the act of open inquiry should be limited. So even what's in our hearts should be, it should be limited in terms of how we can explore various aspects of life.
Well, to understand the Quran thoroughly, one has to compare verse with verse. One has to look at other places where the Quran speaks about something similar, and to see how one passage may reflect another one expands on another one, and so on. The passage which compares with this is in Surah 6, verse number 154. There, in both places, we have a listing that many compare with the 10 commandments from the Bible. There's a list of several commandments following one after another. So there is a mention of the property of the orphans, that you shouldn't go near the property of the orphans, you should leave that alone, and that you should give full measure. And then right after that, there is this mention in Surah 7, verse 34, that you're going to be questioned regarding the use of your vision and your ears and your mind. And it says, don't pursue that of which you have no knowledge. Well, a similar sequence of commandments are given in Surah 7, and in verse number 154 we have the verse which synchronizes with the one we're looking at here. There it says, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. And this is my straight path, so follow it. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ. So do not follow the different paths, for those will take you away from the path of God. So it seems that what these two verses now synchronized are speaking of is that you have some knowledge which has been vouchsafed to you from God through His special revelation in the form of the Quranic text. So follow that. And do not follow that of which you have no knowledge, meaning other things which might be proposed to you, but you don't really know what they are. You don't know the origins, you don't know the veracity of those other beliefs and propositions. So follow that which you know. And that which you think might be true is not a substitute for that which you already know to be true. That's the point, really.
When I was reading the commentary, it pointed to things like idle curiosity, like not following one's idle curiosity, and there are many people, many Muslims who might pursue that and say, well, don't explore philosophy or whatever. So how do you respond to somebody who says, well, I'm looking at that verse and I'm seeing, it's telling me this? I mean, do you have to be an expert to be able to get the sort of meaning that you're getting from the Quran or from this particular verse?
No, one doesn't have to be an expert. There are 4 levels of meaning in the Quran, according to a narrative reported by Ibn Abbas, the prime commentator on the Quran. He said that there's a level which no one can be excused from not knowing. So there are certain aspects of the Quran which every Muslim is required to know, and obviously will know, and just simply from reading it. The second, there is that level of understanding which is dependent on the Arabic language. Obviously, there are certain nuances in the language which will only be picked up by one who is reading it knowing the language. Some things are lost in the translation, to put it simply. And then there's a third level of understanding, which is granted only to the scholars. Obviously, the ways of linking verses, of knowing the whole text, to be able to move freely between one part of the Quran and another. This is a scholarly sort of activity, and it's not available to every individual who is busy with accounting or engineering or medical science and so on. One has to be a specialist to rise to a certain level of understanding. And then he said, fourthly, that there is a level of understanding that is known only to God. So certain aspects of the text, like for example, the huruf muqatta'at, those letters that begin some chapters of the Quran, which do not spell any words and are just simply there as initials. How do we understand them? Well, we don't. It's only God that knows the reason for their existence and what he means by them. So there are four levels of understanding, and obviously everybody has to be at least at the bottom level. Everybody has to know certain aspects of the Quran. Certain things are so very clear to people. One can say that to a certain extent there are passages in the Quran which prohibit Muslims from spreading gossip and speaking of things as if they know, whereas in fact at the bottom of it is that they don't really know. Yes. They're speaking as though they know. But that's not only a Quranic principle, it's a generally accepted principle. Even if a person is...
But are there aspects of the Quran that say, you should limit the sort of questions that you ask?
Not really. In terms of
or like the books you read, these are sorts of things that some Muslims seem to say.
There is one thing that should be mentioned in this regard, is that there is a verse in the Quran which says that you should not ask about things prior to their being revealed to you, because if you ask about them, then they will be revealed to you, and then that will just simply, to summarize, that will just simply make life more difficult for you. But that refers to specific commandments. People were asking the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is this prohibited, is that prohibited, what about that? So if they ask, they'll get an answer, and then a new thing would be prohibited which wasn't prohibited before. It's not that God forgot about it, it's that God was letting you off on that. But when you ask about it, then you get a ruling. And that still applies today. People shouldn't keep asking about things, is that prohibited, is that prohibited? We have a general sense of what's prohibited and not. We should follow that and do our best to master those, but not to ask about new things, because that will just give us new rulings and make life more difficult. But in terms of free inquiry about different subjects, studying philosophy, for example, I don't see that there's anything wrong with that, and I don't see that there's anything that prohibits the study of that. The only one subject area I know to be prohibited, as mentioned in the hadith, is the study of magic.
All right, thank you for that. We'll take a break. When we come back, we will look at the fifth pillar of Islam, which is Hajj, or pilgrimage.